In August 1914, as European armies marched toward the opening slaughter of the First World War, President Woodrow Wilson sat in the Oval Office and drafted a solemn proclamation. He declared that the United States must remain neutral in fact as well as in name, standing as a beacon of peace and moral authority. Textbooks often claim America was dragged into the fighting by German submarine attacks and the interception of the Zimmermann telegram, but beneath the diplomatic cables and naval skirmishes lay a calculating economic reality, one methodically erased from the patriotic war posters. That reality was hidden inside the leather-bound accounting ledgers of a 4-story neoclassical marble building at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets. This was 23 Wall Street, the international headquarters of JPMorgan and Company. The records at the corner suggest that the American intervention functioned as a maneuver to prevent a catastrophic sovereign default from destroying the United States banking system. JP Morgan and Company operated as an elite private merchant bank, serving as the supreme commander of American corporate capitalism. In 1913, the Congressional Pujo Committee electrified the nation by exposing this structure. Their investigation found that a tiny interlocking directorate of Wall Street bankers, led by the House of Morgan, held 341 directorships across 112 major corporations, controlling $22 billion in national wealth. Following the death of the patriarch, leadership passed to his son, Jack Morgan Jr. Jack was an intense Anglophile who had lived in London for years and counted British cabinet ministers among his closest personal friends. To the partners at Morgan, the British Empire was the ultimate guardian of global commerce and private property. This made a British military defeat financially and philosophically unacceptable to the most powerful men in American finance. Yet in 1914, the American economy was in the grip of a grinding recession. The sudden outbreak of war paralyzed international trade, forcing the New York Stock Exchange to shut down for 4 months. Railway revenues plummeted, and steel mills in Pittsburgh operated at less than 50% capacity. Secretary of State William Jennings Bryan recognized that finance could drag the nation into the conflict. He wrote to President Wilson, warning that money is the worst of all contraband because it commands all other things. Bryan's logic was based on the psychological mechanics of debt. If American bankers lend hundreds of millions to foreign nations at war, those bankers would acquire a direct financial stake in the military outcome. They would use their media connections and financial leverage to push the government into war to guarantee their loans were repaid. Wilson agreed and issued the Bryan Doctrine, declaring that neutrality required a strict prohibition on American loans to belligerent nations. Maintaining this doctrine was the only way to ensure the American Republic remained independent of the slaughterhouse. By late 1914, industrial trench warfare was consuming resources at a rate domestic factories couldn't match. British and French factories lacked the specialized tools to manufacture precision artillery fuses and the chemicals to produce TNT. Senior Morgan partner Henry P. Davison traveled to London and signed the commercial agency agreement. This contract turned 23 Wall Street into the exclusive purchasing agent and financial underwriter for the entire British war effort in the United States. Morgan established an export department that processed thousands of coated cables from Europe every morning. At its height, the House of Morgan was purchasing more than $10 million of war supplies every single day, taking a direct commission on every rifle and bushel of wheat. Morgan directed these contracts to industrial giants like DuPont and Bethlehem Steel. DuPont was repurposed into a gargantuan munitions empire, supplying 40% of all the explosives used by the Allies during the entire war. While this procurement machine cured the 1914 recession, it left the American economy dependent on the Allied war trade. In May 1915, a German submarine torpedoed the luxury liner RMS Lusitania. While the public mourned the loss of innocent civilian lives, the ship's cargo manifest revealed a different reality. It was carrying over 4 million rounds of rifle ammunition and 1,200 cases of shrapnel shells, procured by Morgan for the British military. By the summer of 1915, the British had nearly exhausted their gold reserves. Without new credit, they would be forced to cancel their American manufacturing contracts, potentially triggering a catastrophic domestic depression. Under pressure from Morgan partners and Treasury Secretary William Gibbs McAdoo, President Wilson abandoned the Bryan Doctrine. Bryan resigned in protest, and Wilson signaled that the State Department would no longer object to private banks floating public loans to the Allies. By allowing Wall Street to publicly finance the war trade, the invisible chain dragging America into the conflict was permanently locked into place. By late 1916, the battles of Verdun and the Somme had exhausted Allied credit. The total amount lent by American private banks reached $2.5 billion. The newly created Federal Reserve Board issued a warning memo to member banks, cautioning that this unsecured debt was an unsafe banking practice. This sparked a panic on Wall Street. British exchange rates plummeted, and the Allies were suddenly unable to borrow a single new dollar. On March 5, 1917, Ambassador Walter Hines Page sent a top-secret cable from London directly to President Wilson. He laid out the naked truth. The only way of maintaining our present preeminent trade position and diverting a panic is by declaring war on Germany. The House of Morgan could no longer carry the Allied debt on its own balance sheet. Only the federal government could prevent a banking collapse, and it could only lend billions to the Allies if the United States became an official belligerent in the war. Following the war declaration in April, the U.S. Treasury launched the Liberty Loan Drives. Citizens were mobilized to buy billions of dollars in war bonds to fund the crusade for democracy. The government used beloved public figures like Charlie Chaplin to whip up patriotic fervor, selling the bonds on street corners across the country. Trace the exact path of that capital. The U.S. government lent $9.5 billion of public tax money to the Allied governments. Those governments immediately used that money to pay off their maturing private debts and unsecured loans to JPMorgan and the Wall Street banking syndicates. This represented a massive socialization of private debt, transferring Wall Street's reckless bets onto the backs of ordinary American taxpayers. This machinery remained buried beneath patriotic mythology until the Great Depression. In 1934, the Senate established the Nye Committee to investigate the munitions industry. Investigators subpoenaed the partners of JPMorgan & Co. and placed the secret ledgers and Ambassador Page's 1917 cable into the official record. The revelation that American neutrality had been a complete illusion so horrified the public that Congress passed the Neutrality Acts, explicitly banning loans and arms sales to foreign nations to ensure Wall Street could never orchestrate a second bailout. 116,000 young American soldiers died in the trenches of France, and 200,000 more were wounded or maimed by artillery. When you look past the patriotic slogans of 1917, the human cost remains. The soldiers did not die to make the world safe for democracy. They died to enforce a private bank's balance sheet.